Ça devrait être bon là. 1, 2, 3 test UNTV. 1, 2, 3 test UNTV. C'est bon, ça module pour toi? Impeccable. Voilà. 1, 2, 3 test UNTV. 1, 2, 3 test UNTV. Canal anglais. 1, 2, 3 test UNTV.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to meeting number 4241 of the Human Rights Committee. This is a public meeting and is being on webcast. It is devoted to the continuation of the consideration of the second periodic report of Haiti. Your Excellency, Madam Patricia Sangjang, you have 15 minutes to continue with your outstanding replies. Thereafter, I'll give the floor to a number of members of the committee to pose their questions on the second half of the list of issues prior to reporting, which are issues 13 to 24. Then, as yesterday, your delegation will have a 15-minute break to allow you to prepare your response to the questions posed by the members. You will then have 1 hour to respond to the questions posed. After which you will allow time for follow-up questions and answers. The meeting today will adjourn at 1 p.m. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Your Excellency, Madam Sangjang. Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Chairperson, distinguished committee members, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for the delegation to return this morning to start by answering the additional follow-up questions put at the end of yesterday's session. I want to highlight that a large portion of the delegation isn't present with us, wasn't able to come for this session as of yesterday indeed. And so we are here to answer the questions you've raised, but as regards the follow-up questions, we sent those off to the different departments that should have been represented by experts during this session, and they've been able to work on the answers and have sent them back to us to read for you. So to begin, the first question was to provide a further explanation concerning the judicial offices, the Bureau, and their implementation in terms of financial, intellectual, and human resources, and to provide a summary of each of those different offices and their mandate. So the DG will answer those questions. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I want to answer the questions on those legal bureau. There's one on mass crimes and sexual violence. That's in Port-au-Prince. There's another on financial crime, which is located. Well, I should say that these bureau comprise 10 judges, 6 in the first instance and 4 in appeal courts, and they work with the police and the financial oversight and regulatory bodies. In financial terms, their operation is ensured by donors from the international community and the state. The second question that was put to us: how do you plan to build trust between the police and the population? The ambassador will answer that question. Thank you very much, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The community police is in the process of carrying out an awareness raising campaign. In some areas, there has indeed been a challenging situation, and trust is needing to be built progressively. given the insecurity that the Haitian population is experiencing. It's thanks to the cooperation from the population that the police is managing to reduce insecurity in the capital and in some other towns. Furthermore, training sessions are being organized targeting police officers with a view to protecting the population. And when reports are made against members of the police force, the National Inspectorate for the Police carries out investigations and looks at how to progress with that. Measures are taken when necessary. The next question, how are you planning on reducing the free circulation of weapons in the country? And the Director General is going to answer that as well. Monitoring steps have been strengthened in this area. Haiti already has a plan to set up scanners at customs, and the state has strengthened the border to the Dominican Republic and containers coming from the US as well in terms of monitoring. With a view to limiting the circulation of weapons within the country, the police has begun strict checks on private vehicles and goods vehicles, as well as motorbikes. To this, there are police patrols and armed forces patrols in the streets that we add. In order to recently further reduce the free circulation of weapons, the authorities adopted specific measures, in particular the suspension of land imports from the Dominican Republic as of the 7th of April 2025, imposing that all goods crossing the border by sea as well should be in line with the 2023 customs law, which aims to limit clandestine imports of weapons through porous borders. In coordination with the National Police and the Haitian Armed Forces, the General Administration of the Customs ensures strengthened monitoring at the customs and seizures of illegal imports with the appropriate administrative and criminal penalties. Despite this, we are confronting a bolstered criminal campaign and corruption with the need for increased international support to reduce weapons flow to Haiti. Thank you very much. Another question that was put to us, which I answered, but which was put again, was could you distinguish between the green and red zones? Green zones are safe zones and red zones are ones where there is a heightened risk. The fifth question, which sectors participated in drafting the draft constitution and what's at the basis of the new constitution? What was at the root of it? There is a social consensus which supports the change to the constitution, and the different sectors that worked on it are universities, representatives of local organizations and political parties, and a new consensus of all of those sectors is underway at the moment, and they've worked to produce a draft, and that was issued and made available. So that's been around all of those different sectors, and each of the different bodies that participated in the drafting thereof will have seen that many of their proposals were retained in the draft, and that process finished as of the 21st of June, and that's now been subject to proposals sent in by the committee responsible for the drafting of the new constitution. Now, I think the lady asked the question as to how to ensure the security of midwives and other medical staff, as well as pregnant women who are seeking medical health care. How do midwives deal with the need for C-sections? And the ambassador will answer that as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so midwives are trained to identify obstetric complications, but they don't carry out C-sections themselves. These are done by obstetric doctors. Haitian midwives play a key role in early detection of complications and guidance towards healthcare structures able to carry out C-sections and stabilization of patients before transfers. So everything to do with monitoring and drips and so on and so forth. They also carry out the post-operative monitoring in local areas, in rural areas, and so their work saves lives on a daily basis, and we thank them. In Haiti, guaranteeing the safety of midwives and access to care for pregnant women is a key priority under the aegis of the Ministry for Public Health and the Population in a context characterized by persistent insecurity and institutional fragility. Thank you. So before beginning this first cluster, I just want to remind you that all of the answers we've read out are provided to us by our experts, and we've just read those out. And we hope in so doing that we've been able to answer the additional questions that you put at the end of yesterday afternoon's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Madam Jiang. Now we will start the second round of questions by the members. I will give the floor first to Mr. Ndiaye.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais tout d'abord dire...
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by greeting the delegation and wishing them a very good morning, as well as representatives of civil society that are with us. I hope you've had a good night of rest despite the heat and the storm, and that today our dialogue will continue in the same vein of goodwill that we saw yesterday. In that connection, I have three questions which are basically follow-up questions to what was asked yesterday. I'm going to come back again to this issue of ratifying the second optional protocol to the extent that de facto all of the conditions for a clear-cut abolition of the death penalty are in place. But what I continue to wonder is whether or not there are obstacles that actually are preventing Haiti from ratifying the second optional protocol, because de facto, you're basically acting as if you've ratified it. So why don't you formalize that and lock in good faith that abolition? That's what I'm wondering. The second question relates to the impact of gang violence, in particular in the area of healthcare, which is necessary for the enjoyment of the right to life, including the murderous attacks against ambulance that have been reported and the closure of healthcare centres and the flight from the country of healthcare staff. Are any measures planned by the government to confront these problems, which are further compromising the enjoyment of the population to the right of life, given that there were already deficits in that area and it's becoming increasingly challenging? The third question rather, relates to the prison population. The overcrowding rate in prisons at the end of March 2025, according to a High Commissioner report, stood at 303%. That is an astonishing overcrowding rate. In addition, because of inaccessibility issues, persons with disabilities are unable to access places of detention and their disability isn't taken into account. And furthermore, more generally, for all inmates, there's a lack of access to appeal concerning, and legal appeals in particular, concerning their detention conditions. How does Haiti plan to resolve this problem? I wonder. We understand it's very difficult to address this, and we hope these questions can broaden our debate and will help us down the line to make meaningful recommendations, which we hope will lead to an improvement of all of this context that we join together here today to deplore. Thank you very much for your attention.
Much, Mr. Ndiaye. Now I give the floor to Mr. Carozzo.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a very good morning, Madam Head of Delegation, and good morning to the entire delegation. It's always great to see delegations that comprise many women among them. We've lost the microphone for the speaker.
Sorry, Mr. Carozzo, can you start again?
Gracias.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I was wishing a warm welcome to everybody, to the head of delegation, to the Haitian delegation, and those joining us both in room and online. It's always fantastic to be hosting a delegation comprising a number of high-ranking women, and that's the case today. And we obviously appreciate what that represents for overcoming the challenges that exist with women's representation in the country. I want to refer to issues 15, 21 and 24. So first of all, prohibition of torture and cruel or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. The reform says that you received 5 complaints of torture between January and June of 2020, which are being investigated. Nonetheless, civil society reports state that cases of torture happen on a daily basis in Haitian prisons and in police custody. Inmates are often hit and beaten by police agents or with the complicity of agents, and data concerning detention conditions, which were already addressed by Mr. Ndiaye, demonstrate that inmates live in inhumane overcrowding contexts. They lack food and they practically have no access to medical attention. 27% of inmates interviewed in one of the sources we received said they had been subject to torture. The Criminal Code enshrines the prohibition of torture and cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Nonetheless, the state provides no information concerning the steps it's taken to prevent torture, and far less to eliminate it altogether. The new criminal code has come into force, and we observe that the state has nonetheless not ratified the Convention Against Torture. So the questions are the following. The state mentions 5 cases dating back to the first semester of 2020, but it fails to mention the daily cases of torture in prisons and police custody. Why did the state omit such information, and why have the perpetrators of those actions not been brought to book, investigated and prosecuted? Second question. Why did it take so long to bring into law the Criminal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, whose texts do prohibit torture and psychological torture included? What measures have been taken to ensure the appropriate implementation of these in relation to torture? Has there been capacity building of law enforcement in this area, and for what reasons has the state not identified or ratified rather the Convention Against Torture when we were hoping to see that happen? With regards to paragraph 21, the right to freedom of circulation and the right to the protection of a private family life, this relates to an issue of key importance the freedom of movement, and this obviously is being heavily obstructed by the insecurity that have been widely discussed by the delegation and the committee yesterday. I'm going to therefore refer exclusively to the right to protect the family and the family life, and in particular the forced evictions by the state and also by non-state actors. Forced evictions have become widespread since the earthquake in 2010. Victims reported these as of 2010 and reported the failures in reconstruction and the protection of victims. These have given rise to unfortunate actions around forced evictions, irregular forced evictions by landowners. In its report, the state denies the existence of forced evictions, but it doesn't give any more information on that subject. But the reports we've received state that forced evictions are widespread in the country and impact a large number of families who are abandoned by the state. And these forced evictions perpetrated by the state, or certainly not resolved by the state, clearly undermine the freedom to select your home as enshrined in Article 12 and the right to protection from undue interference in the home in Article 17 in our convention. In addition, these evictions constantly violate victims' rights to protection from the law against such interference or attacks. And so there's one example is the Pellerin case, and these demonstrate a government failure to consult with the owners of properties, and there was no reasonable warning given to tenants. Eviction plans are not transparent and they're not conducted with clarity, and those living in the homes were evicted with death threats even. They weren't even able to take their belongings with them, and those families are then exposed to abuse and violations of their human rights as a result of the forced eviction that took place. And we know that homes were rebuilt by a public housing company, but according to the state, only 4 of the 7 owners, original owners, were able to take possession of those houses. So what happens with the others? What information do you have about the other 3 resident families, and what explanation do you have for them not taking up possession of those reconstructed homes? The state didn't explain which government civil servants were held responsible for the forced eviction of those families. Please explain how the state took measures to investigate and prosecute those civil servants involved. Recalling in the Pellerin case, we were dealing with homes that were near to the residency of the then President of the Republic, who was then killed by non-state actors. I want to now refer to the damage caused by Hurricane Matthew in 2016. This caused a state of emergency declaration in 4 departments by the national government and an environmental state of emergency across the entire country to facilitate rapid intervention to restore infrastructure damaged by the hurricane. This hurricane affected more than 2.1 million people, 600,000 of those being children, and the president declared that the state of emergency would only affect economic rights. Please explain the measures taken by the government to protect those 600,000 children from the dangers they were subsequently exposed to. The state emphasized that the state of emergency was declared as a way of facilitating restoring the infrastructure, but the information we've received is ambiguous, and you don't state the specific actions you took. So please provide information concerning the distribution of financial aid and the resources used to reconstruct infrastructure that was damaged.
The president declared that the state of emergency only affected economic rights at the time. Please tell us information that can confirm that it was only economic rights that were affected and what remedies were provided. Finally, please provide updated information on the number of people who are still awaiting solutions, remedy for the damage caused 10 years ago, including provision of family units. And if the current situation for those persons and those families when it comes to housing, has it been resolved yet? And what resources have been allocated to address that problem? I will later ask some follow-up questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, delegation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caruso. I'll give the floor to Mr. Quesada.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Greetings to the delegation from Haiti. Thank you for all their efforts in responding to our questions. Today, I've got questions on para 16 and 17 on elimination of all forms of slavery, and paragraph 20 on the independence of the judiciary and the right to a fair trial. I'll start with paragraph 16. Please tell us about implementation of the National Action Plan to combat child labor, adopted on 26 July 2019. In particular, what is the duration of the plan? Is it still in force? And if not, has a new plan been adopted, and what have been its results? We'd also like to know what relation this plan has with the new document for the National Strategy for Combating Human Trafficking in Humans 2025-2035. Please provide updated data on the number of children exploited as arrestaveks, or children in domestic situations, as the state party prefers to call them, as well as child victims of begging and other forms of exploitation who've received protection from the state. What kind of protection have they been given? Please tell us also if you intend to adopt measures to bolster the functioning and increase the resources for the Institute of Social Wellbeing and Research, the lead institution for protection of children. Please inform us on work done specifically with respect to exploitation of children by the Committee for Combating Human Trafficking, created in 2015. I'd like to know, how have you dealt with situations of human organ trafficking, ill treatment of children in orphanages and adoption houses, the lack of protection services for victims, as well as the imposition of forced sanctions for forced labor covered by provided for in the criminal code? And then we'd also like to know, have information on the following. When it comes to the grave political crisis that Haiti has gone through, which has been exacerbated since the assassination of President Moïse in 2021, various international reports have documented violence against children who are recruited and used by the gangs, sexually abused, gravely injured, or killed directly by members of those gangs, or as a result of clashes between gangs and authorities. An even graver impact is felt by children with disabilities. As we know, the widespread practice of recruitment and use of children by gangs is a form of human trafficking, among other abuses. In the 2024 report that UN Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict, the report says that during 2023 that there were a total of 383 grave violations against 307 children, including 32 who were victims of multiple violations. Meanwhile, the Secretary General's report, in line with Resolution 2743 of the Security Council, which extended the mandate of the UN office in Haiti reported on a sharp rise in homicide in the period December 2024, February 2025, where 19 girls and 55 boys were victims. In the same period, the gangs committed a higher number of abductions than the previous trimester, and there were 17 girls, 10 boys abducted. What measures have been adopted by the state to combat and prevent these grave violations of these provisions of the covenant, and in particular to protect children from all forms of violence? Finally, on Paris 16, the state party says in its document of updated replies that to help minors and child soldiers, victims of violence by armed groups, the TPC created, as per decree of 28th February 2025, a commission responsible for supporting the creation of a national network of shelters and rehabilitation centres. Members of this commission were appointed by decree of 12th March 2025, took office on 24th June. Please inform us if this commission has the human and financial resources necessary to perform its functions, and what does its work in support of creating a national network of shelters and rehabilitation centres consist of? I move now to questions on paragraph 17. First, I would like to know about the work carried out by the National Committee for Combating Human Trafficking, created in 2015. What are its functions? Does it have sufficient resources to perform its functions? And in its response, this list of issues, State Party reported that the National Committee for Combating Human Trafficking prepared a document entitled Strategy, a National Plan for Combating Human Trafficking 2017-2022. Here we'd like to know if there is any assessment of the results of this strategy and national plan. Please tell us if you have prepared or are preparing a new plan in this field. Furthermore, we'd like updated information on criminal investigations carried out to combat offences of trafficking, including trafficking for the purposes of domestic slavery and forced prostitution since October 2014. That was the date of the last review of the report presented by the State Party, indicating the number of convictions and what kind of sanctions were handed down, as well as compensation granted to victims. Finally, tell us what measures have been adopted along the Dominican-Haitian border to prevent trafficking in persons, especially of children, who are then sold in the Dominican Republic. I move now to questions on paragraph 20, independence of the judiciary, the right to fair trial. We understand that on 17th July 2024, the Transitional Presidential Council created the Commission to implement criminal reform, whose mandate consists of assessing the criminal code and criminal procedure codes, formulate recommendations, prepare implementation decrees. The commission, made up of 9 members, took office on 25th July last year. The document of updated replies says that both reviewed codes were approved by the Council of Ministers on 24th June 2025. As per this information, could the delegation inform us if any further proceedings are still pending for these codes to enter force, and what are the main reforms carried out towards its provisions? With respect to violence sparked by criminal groups that affected the justice courts, as occurred during the firebomb attacks in 2022 and 2024 on judiciary buildings, please tell us what measures have been adopted in terms of criminal prosecution to deal with this grave situation and guarantee the security and safety of judges and judicial operators. In the report presented to the Human Rights Council in January 2022, the State Party reported on the creation of a National Council of Legal Assistance pursuant to the Law on Free of Charge Legal Assistance of 10 December 2018, stating that in 7 of the 18 jurisdictional organs, first instance organs, there were legal assistance offices up and running to facilitate access to justice for the most vulnerable, and that the remaining organs would have offices of legal assistance once the council budget permitted. Later in the document of updated replies, it says that these legal assistance offices have already been set up in 12 jurisdictions. Please, therefore, tell us what's the current situation with the National Council for Legal Assistance, and does it have the necessary budget to perform its functions, including setting up legal assistance offices throughout all first instance jurisdictional organs? The same report presented the Human Rights Council. In that report, the State Party says that the Higher Judicial Power Council was established by law on 13th November 2007. In Articles 1 and 2, it provides that the judiciary is independent of the executive and legislature. Please tell us who are the members of the council, how are their members appointed, and how is its independence guaranteed from the executive and legislative. Furthermore, we know that this council proposes the names of judges going from guardians of the peace to members of the appeals tribunal who are named by the President of the Republic, but they doesn't participate in the process of appointing judges to the cassation tribunal who are appointed by the President of the Republic following recommendation from the Senate of the Republic. Please explain the difference between these two processes for appointment of judges, and how do you guarantee that the intervention of the Senate in on the basis that it is up and running, the Senate, that it's properly working? How do you guarantee that the intervention of the Senate in the case of judges of the cassation tribunal doesn't affect its independence? As I said, on the if we assume that the Senate is properly functioning, finally, we'd like to know what role does the council play in combating corruption in the judicial sphere? Finally, with respect to insufficient resources for the justice sector, we'd like to know what measures have been taken here and if there's been any increase to the budget assigned to the judiciary. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quesada. Now I'll give the floor to Madame Tigruza.
Merci.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to welcome the delegation back. I want to thank them very much for all their work, this liaison work with Capital. It's clear that we asked many questions involving the judiciary, the police, and so on. So we very much appreciate your efforts to get that feedback back from the experts who've given you responses, and that obviously helps us in better understanding the situation on the ground. If I may, some follow-up questions first to your responses to the follow-ups. Thank you for what you said about the judiciary polls. Now, I also read that Haiti has just recently reached an agreement with the UN office, UNODC, specifically to enhance the capacities of the judiciary pool, which will be working on financial crimes. So if you could give me give us maybe more information on the content of that agreement. Now, with respect to women's issues, the sage-femme, midwives, they do vital work, but the information we've received, despite the crucial role played by midwives and the priority of they work in conditions of major insecurity, and they lack basic medication, they lack all basic materials to help women, and many women don't have access even to midwives. So if you have more specific data based on the question that I asked. And a third sort of follow-up question, which echoes what you mentioned, Madam Minister, yesterday on displacement of persons, especially the fact that women bore the brunt of these displacements. There is a problem which perhaps is not immediately visible, but it's very serious, and it's been brought to our attention, the fact that often this security crisis is accompanied by this crisis of the civil state, because people lose their ID documents, birth certificates, there's no registration of birth, and it means that you get into a situation of displacement, as well as a situation of real instability, precarity in the legal meaning of the term, because people no longer have ID documents to establish who they are, to establish their identity. So we have very much alerted the Human Rights Committee to this crisis in the État civil. And the enjoyment of by persons of their right to the ID documents. So any light you could shed on that for the committee would be most welcome, this issue of identity, which affects obviously many of the rights under the covenant, such as Article 17, 16, the right to legal personality. So those are just my follow-up questions. Now, today we're going to be looking at Paris 22 and 2023, the civic space. This is a theme that we haven't yet broached, but which has been a source of major concern in the various UN bodies, including in the UN Security Council. For example, in 2022, the Special Rapporteurs on Freedom of Expression on extrajudicial executions sent to Haiti a communication regarding the execution of two journalists, Amity John Wesley and Wilkins Louison, who were reporting on insecurity in the country. The rapporteurs cited Articles 6 and 19 of the Covenant to remind Haiti of its obligation to investigate and protect the work of journalists. This is one example among many added to more recent incidents. Our committee received information whereby in 2024, 5 journalists were murdered. No investigation was carried out. Others were abducted or assaulted. More recently, in February this year, police opened fire on protesters in the commune of Delmas, killing journalists who were covering the protest there. Sadly, the impunity surrounding execution of journalists and human rights defenders, judges or lawyers seems to be structural and there's nothing new. For example, and we mention it in our list of points, Jean-Léopold Dominique killed 3rd April 2000, Brignol Lindor assassinated 3rd December 2001, Vladimir Leganier went missing in Grand Ravine in March 2018, Némi Joseph, October 2019, and Rosbud Pétion killed 10th June 2019. Furthermore, gang violence had led to the closure or restrictions on media such as Radio Mega, Radio Télévision Caraïbe, Radio Mélodie, Télépluriel, among others. And again, according to information received, a very popular radio program is said to have been suspended in November 2024 by Conatel on suspicion of serving as a platform for a gang. I'd also add that in one of the latest reports to the Security Council in March 2025, UNODC highlighted the use by gangs of social networks to attack journalists. In the report, in the UNODC report, there is the example of a TikTok video by Jimmy Cherizier urging other gang chiefs to capture 4 radio journalists. And he says, I quote, "Consider the journalists as your enemies. They're eligible for the death penalty if they oppose to us. Journalists who defend the elites should be reduced to silence," unquote. These are grave threats, not just to freedom of expression of journalists and human rights defenders, but also to the right of the public to receive information. And this element is important, I stress, because it sort of picks up on the questions that Mr. Quesada and Mr. Carazo asked about the holding of a referendum, for example, on electoral rights. How can such a referendum or elections, how can they take place if the state can't provide at least a minimum of free circulation of ideas, democratic pluralism, and the normal work of journalists and human rights defenders? So my questions are similar to the ones I asked yesterday. How do you intend to combat impunity surrounding executions and ill treatment of journalists and other social actors, be it by the police or by gangs? What measures have been done to support the work of human rights defenders and guarantee their security, regardless of the theme on which they're working, even if these are sensitive themes that are sensitive to the government? And concerning more specifically cyber violence against journalists and human rights defenders, what's the state doing, particularly in terms of regulating social network platforms, which, again, according to the UNODC report I mentioned, are a sort of total bubble of impunity? Now, on para 23 is on freedom of protest, which is often suppressed through excessive use of force by police or which are impeded by gangs, as mentioned by Mr. Ndiaye. This was reflected in the list of issues with the incidents that took place in the 2018 and 2019 protests, which started with the Petros Challenger movement concerning allegations of corruption and embezzlement of Petrocaribe funds. Since 2019, the situation has only got worse in a climate of almost total impunity. In January, February 2024, for example, during anti-government protests, 22 people are said to have been killed, 48 others injured by the police. Moreover, in July 2024, the right to protest was apparently suspended, even though the state party, and this again echoes Mr. Quesada, the state party did not waive the covenant. Nevertheless, starting March 2025, anti-government protests organized by self-defense groups were launched to complain about the security context and inaction by the state. I should note that freedom of association, Article 22 of the Covenant, is itself severely restricted in this security context, since numerous civil society organizations have been attacked, threatened, have had to leave their working spaces and can no longer properly discharge their missions. So my questions are as follows. What measures have been taken to investigate and establish responsibility of police directly involved in excessive use of force in suppressing peaceful demonstrations, as well as the responsibility of gangs? And what measures have been taken to guarantee the work of civil society, NGOs, and other associations in full security and free from any intimidation or harassment?
Thank you very much, Madam Tiguruza. These are all the questions this morning, so I will give 15 minutes break to prepare the reply. So meeting is suspended. Then I will give the delegation 1 hour to reply to the questions by the members. Then you have the floor, Madam Sangjang.
Thank you very much for bearing with us. To the best of our ability, we'll answer all of the questions you have asked. I don't think everybody's seated yet, Chair. Okay, fine. We'll answer as best as possible the answers you put to us. And those questions that don't have answers, we will happily send those in writing. We'll begin with the Director General, and then we'll pass the floor to Mr. Kalamus, and then we'll move on. So thank you very much, and thank you for your attention in advance.
Good morning. We're going to talk about action to deal with prison overcrowding. Overcrowding in prisons remains a big problem that the government continues to tackle, especially with the destruction of the main penitentiary establishments in March 2024. Fighting this phenomenon aims not only to improve detention conditions, but also clarify the legal status of detainees and to make sure and to deal with pre-trial detention to stop it from becoming a grave affront to human dignity and human rights. To the Public Security and Justice Ministry and the Superior Council of the Police have issued instructions to the first instance prosecutions and tribunals to encourage holding of criminal sessions with jury present or not, with a view to relieving overcrowding in the provinces during 2023-24. Criminal sessions with or without presence of jury were held in 14 jurisdictions, leading to 129 convictions. 55 habeas actions were 42 which were heard by the courts. Regularly holding correctional hearings, including in Port-au-Prince, which in itself accounts for about 7% of the prison population. However, criminal hearings we couldn't hold them in proper security conditions so as to avoid arbitrary arrest and the detention of prisoners who had already served their sentence, addressing files linked to gender-based violence in a swift, rapid manner, encourage judges to address cases within the deadline assigned by law. In 2024, the total number of detained throughout the country was close to 12,000. To that date, the national penitentiary held about 35% of the total prison population, 3,700 detainees. These included 3,200 were in situations of prolonged pretrial detention. 3,600 prisoners escaped in 2024. Those who stayed in the prison were relocated to another prison. Since then, we've managed to recapture only 12 of those who escaped. Currently, who have been reincarcerated at one of the prisons. Despite the efforts of the judicial authorities, mass arrests carried out by the national police haven't contributed to reducing prolonged pretrial detention nor to improving detention conditions. To date, the penitentiary system has the following population: 4,000 men, convicts, 1,300 men, 11 boys, 1 girl. There's been this significant drop in the number of detainees can be explained chiefly by the escapes during the armed attacks carried out against certain penitentiary infrastructure. Non-custodial measures. The Justice Ministry and the Public Security Ministry have actively encouraged courts to privilege non-custodial measures for persons before the law, particularly those without presenting no risk of reoffending or escape. This is part of respecting fundamental freedoms and seeks to relieve prison overcrowding, and is also based on the UN minimum rules for the treatment of detainees. Within the prosecution, it's been decided to limit the number of mandates and to give preference to non-custodial measures by encouraging mediation. The government recognizes the need to prevent arbitrary arrests and to release prisoners once sentences are served. Therefore, efforts are underway to bolster the penal chain through better coordination between the penitential and judicial authorities. Regular audits of detention cases will be carried out to identify those cases where a release should be granted. Separation of prisoners remains a priority in handling the penitentiary administration. The penitentiary administration seeks to ensure that that principle is properly observed throughout all prisons in the country. For example, in Cermicol, despite its configuration, its unusual configuration, the 3 main categories of detainees, women and girls, men, are rigorously separated between men, children, and women, and placed in different locations. To date, Cermicol holds 6,000 detainees, 172 women, girls, 287 men, and 89 minor boys. Those categories are lodged separately in line with international norms on the rights of persons in detention. The administration has maintained its operations to ensure the handling and policing of penitentiary establishments, and it has brought together penitentiary agents from Croix du Bouquet, from the National Penitentiary, and has reinforced the security arrangements. Despite its efforts, there's still only 1 police for 14 detainees. Measures to improve detention conditions. The government remains committed to improving detention conditions in spite of security challenges, overcrowding, and logistical constraints. Special hearings have helped the release of 7 minors in October 2024, and the chief of the first instance court in Port-au-Prince recently examined the cases of female detainees with a view to potential release. The mortality rate in prisons has dropped from 74 in 2024 to 59 in 2025, thanks to coordinated action, including bolstered cooperation between the penitentiary administration and national international partners to provide medical care, humanitarian aid, mobile clinics, and supplies of essential products. Healthcare services have been established in a number of establishments, and measures to reduce overcrowding are underway. The refitting of the Pétionville Centre and the plans to build 12 new prisons. The policy for separating detainees has been bolstered in the provinces, but remains limited in Port-au-Prince for security and infrastructure reasons. Despite those efforts, results remain partial due to the security crisis. Logistical difficulties, budgetary constraints. Increased support is necessary to guarantee fundamental freedoms of detainees. Information on the conclusions of the commission set up in 2017 to investigate deaths in prison. In 2017, the state set up a presidential commission for investigation to shed light on deaths in the Port-au-Prince prison between 2016 and 2017. The conclusion of the investigation highlighted a number of aggravating factors, including severe overcrowding, way above norms, insufficiency of medical care, food hygiene, irregularities in administrative and logistic management of prisons, including suspicion of embezzlement of funds, judicial malfunctioning due to prolonged pretrial detention. The Commission formulated a series of tangible recommendations to try and reduce pretrial detention, to improve nutritional and health conditions, to fight corruption within the prison chain, guaranteed psychological supervision and provide reintegration mechanisms for detainees, investigate cases of deaths, alleged case, and the government committed to follow up to the recommendations of the Commission to improve sustainably detention conditions and to guarantee the respect of fundamental rights of persons in detention. Independent of the judiciary system and right to appeal. The influence of executive and legislative on the functioning of the judiciary, in particular on the prosecution. The state reaffirms its commitment to the principle of independence of justice as guaranteed by the Constitution and international commitments. In line with Article 23 of the Decree of August 2015, police commissioners are agents of the executive power to the tribunals, but that hierarchical relationship does not call into question the autonomy of judiciary action. The state remains committed to bolstering the integrity, transparency, and effectiveness of the judicial system, respecting the rule of law. Specific measures taken by the Superior Council of the Judiciary. The Superior Council of the Judiciary has implemented several measures, tangible measures, to guarantee independence of judiciary officers and bolster the effectiveness of the justice system. Obligatory certification of judiciary officers in 2024. The administration conducted that certification in February 2024. When it comes to observing judicial guarantees, at the same time combating prolonged pretrial detention, the government will be implementing a plan to hold criminal and correctional sessions. At the same time, steps have been taken to apply immediate appearance before the judge as per the law of 2017. Thank you.
Merci, Madame François.
Thank you, Madame François. I give the floor now to the Ambassador Laseg. Thank you very much, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman. Concerning some of the questions asked regarding torture, ratification of the CAT was deferred to the 29th legislature for ratification, but it was not adopted, so it will come up during the next legislature. However, the internal regulations of the penitentiary administration outlaw all forms of torture and inhumane, degrading treatment. You also asked questions about trafficking and human trafficking. The government has provided financing to the National Anti-Trafficking Committee to support implementation of its action plan. Moreover, instructions have been issued to judiciary officers, judges and commissioners to launch effective prosecutions against the perpetrators of human trafficking. The National Anti-Trafficking Committee has also signed a protocol agreement with the National Council of Legal Assistance to guarantee free of charge legal aid to victims of trafficking. Moreover, a cooperation protocol was signed between the committee and the rectorship of the Haiti University on conducting investigations and research into this phenomenon. In that respect, some 100 students from the university received training on the issue of human trafficking. Regarding prosecution of traffickers involved in trafficking cases, several judicial proceedings have been opened and verdicts have been handed down. However, following the mass escapes in March 2024, a number of traffickers, unfortunately, were able to escape. And the Justice Ministry then issued instructions to the prosecution for special attention to be given to the treatment of all cases regarding human trafficking. And to answer the question that was raised for more clarity regarding midwives, Haiti recognizes challenges linked to the security of midwives, healthcare professionals, and pregnant women in the context of this ongoing crisis. The MSPP, in other words, the ministries in partnership with NGOs and the UN have established strategies to provide continued healthcare, including activation of a minimum emergency situation in sexual reproductive health. Now, the relocation of certain services, temporary relocation, and the use of mobile clinics in high-risk areas. Midwives, although they themselves don't do cesareans, they are trained to detect early detection of complications and early referral to hospitals, bolstering their technical capacities and establishing protection provisions are underway. Haiti remains committed to guaranteeing equitable access, secure and dignified access to maternal healthcare services. I would also like to speak a bit about the question of independence of the judiciary in Haiti. So the law of 2017 on creation of the Superior Council of the Judiciary makes this an organ of the judiciary power. The CSPG has its own budget. It organizes the functioning of the courts as per the provisions of the decree of 22nd August 1995. The Constitution guarantees the fact that judges can't be dismissed. However, they are named by presidential decree. Moreover, the committee has special prerogatives allowing it to revamp the judicial structure through certification mechanisms, and this without influence from the executive. Thank you. Moving on, giving the floor to human rights expert, Mr. Decamus. Thank you. The Minister, Chair, with respect to the concerns regarding a potential risk of restoration of the death penalty stemming from non-ratification of the second optional protocol, our delegation would like to stress that in the judicial hierarchy in Haiti, the Constitution is the very top. That is why the Constitution is called Mama Loi Pia. The Constitution is the mother of all laws. Then come international conventions. That is why it's above so the laws have to be in line with the Haitian constitution. In our country, it's the constitution which locks in the fundamental freedoms and liberties. In Haiti, the constitution outlaws the death penalty in all areas. The current draft constitution under debate reflects that prohibition. While the death penalty is fully outlawed under the constitution, there is no need to fear its restoration. The constitutional lock-in prevails. That doesn't mean that there's a possibility of ratifying the second optional protocol of the covenant. That ratification could be discussed as soon as the legislature is once again functional. With respect to allegations of forced expulsions of families, our delegation wants to stress that there was, pursuant to Article 36(1) of the Constitution, there were expropriations for public utility purposes with the goal of building road and infrastructure and guaranteeing airport security. Expropriations, people who've suffered expropriations have a right to a fixed compensation established at expert level, as well as the right to appeal. Expropriation for public benefit is an exception to the constitutional right to private property. I thank you. I want to speak about eliminating all forms of slavery and servitude. This derives from a state program. First of all, in combating child labor, the state recommends the non-utilization of the Restavek concept. Information communicated to all partners and the population through graphs and in 2021 during the commemoration of the Day of the Haitian Child. Today, we should speak of children in situations of domesticity, since in actual fact, this is not a status, but rather a situation that a child might find themselves in and should be taken out of, or should never even enter in the first place. It's a recommendation which has begun to be integrated at national level, on which international organizations who have not yet become aware of this phenomenon should now refer themselves to. As to children denied parental protection, targeted operations have been carried out seeking to change behavior at various levels, and through operations providing care have been carried out. There's also a project in support of a state project providing support in partnership with UNICEF, Canada, and other sectors. The state has implemented since 2017 a project combating domestic labor by children in line with the Convention on the Rights of the Child ratified by Haiti. That project has been launched in 16 départements around the country. In the West, Gradance and Sud came to an end in 2021. Among the achievements of that project, we can cite the finalization of the list of jobs banned for children and projects to combat child labor. Moreover, the Eureport platform has been up and running since 27th June 2019 with a view to strengthening the participation of youngsters on issues related to rights of the child. Through that platform, about 20,000 people, including 36% girls, have had awareness-raising courses on work of children and other subjects concerning children and young people. Moreover, 23 surveys with a participation rate of 40% have allowed young people to express themselves regarding various themes related to rights of the child, such as domestic labor, birth registration, violence against children, and education. Similarly, we have a project of social protection that's been adapted for increased resilience, March 2021 to June 2029. That project has two main pillars. First, monetary transfers, remittances with healthcare support measures, nutrition and financial inclusion. And second pillar, creating a social protection system in Haiti. Beneficiaries are homes with children under the age of 5, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, people with disabilities. The project is financed by the World Bank. We've received initial financing of $75 million for 6 years. Thanks to that extension of 25 million years this year, in 2025, the project has been extended to run up to 2029. That project has allowed vulnerable families to provide care to themselves and for their children. 23,000 homes receive regular monetary transfers every month. Every home receives a total of $40 per month. Since the existence of the project, we've already served 23,000 homes every month. The most significantly, that project concerns early childhood. Another important aspect of that project begins this year. It concerns gender-based violence. It's being implemented currently in the department of Gradons. Starting in October, we'll have an extension to the south. That aspect of the project will contribute to the education of homes on the impact of violence on themselves and on children. In fact, we're talking about education, which is applicable both for men and women. Families receive education on healthcare, with respect on nutritional practices, how to feed their children. Those actions have a considerable impact in reducing domesticity in Haiti. Professional training, reintegration, reunification of children with their families. Together with UNFPA and the ILO, a professional training program has been launched. That program has already allowed us to train 841 vulnerable teenagers, including over 300 girls from 14 to 17 years and old in various technical farming activities, 800 children in situations of domestic labor, 503 girls were reintegrated with their biological family between 2019 and 2020. Those reunifications are part of a process supporting the school or professional reintegration, coupled with bolstering socioeconomic situations for vulnerable homes. 9,200 children have received support for school re-enrollment. Moreover, 600 survivors of GBV have received temporary sheltering, food, psychosocial support, and strengthening for medical follow-up. Similarly, 4,000 vulnerable homes at risk of, where there's a risk of family separation, 70% headed by women, have taken part to prevent child labor. They received monetary transfers to support income-generating activities, professional training on educational financial education and psychosocial support. We should also highlight the fact that 140,000 people including 64,000 women, have actively participated in activities on rights of the child, on prevention and responding to GBV and domestic labour by children, with a high participation of child protection committees and grassroots actors. The government has accredited 120 foster families, and 68 are also still pending. 165 children were taken into care last year by these foster families, distributed in around 7 departments, with follow-up from the authorities providing psychosocial support to the children and their host families. Moreover, between 22 and 25, several outreach campaigns were carried out in community spaces, in assemblies, markets, in schools, commemorative events, to teach about the harmful effects of child domesticity and to break the generational cycle. The authorities have provided for a pilot investigation in the Northwest with participation of local protection committees. The targeted communes have been identified, the committees have already been formed, paperwork as well. Together with UNICEF, Lisbeth Committee has developed a program for foster family program. Foster families trained to host children who've been taken out of situations of domesticity with a view to ensure their reintegration.
La mise en œuvre de la loi.
So the implementation of the law from 2014 on trafficking in human beings. I think there I would say that the government is continuing to make efforts to ensure the implementation of the law of the 30th of April 2014 on combating trafficking in human beings. And on the institutional level, the CNLDP was set up pursuant to the provisions of Article 3 of that law. I'll now deal with the reform of the judicial system. To respond to the question raised, in the context of judicial reform, the government has set up the CNAL, and that is up and running since December 2019. To date, legal assistance offices have been set up across 12 jurisdictions, and the rollout is ongoing. Furthermore, we have 6 new lower instance courts that were set up between September 2024 and April 2025, and measures are underway to make them fully operational. The Criminal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, following a root and branch reform set up by a reform committee and also pursuant to the critiques reported by civil society, are being adopted, and that was on the 24th of June 2025. It came before the Ministerial Council and was adopted. To ensure the adoption of new text, the Commission set up a training program for lawyers and other judicial staff, as well as judicial police officers. In the context of the institutional reform, a pilot committee under the aegis of the National Conference was made responsible for drafting a new draft constitution, and this was submitted to the Presidential Transition Council and the government on the 21st of May 2025. A decree on the referendum was adopted at the Council of Ministers on the 24th of June 2025 in order to set up a national referendum. Citizens are going to be asked to make a decision about this draft pursuant to a participatory process. And This will lead to turning the leaf on a new institutional era. The adoption of two other decrees should be highlighted as well. That of the 16th of April 2025, which set up a specialized judicial bureau that I've already mentioned, and the decree of the 4th of May 2023, punishing money laundering, funding of terrorism, and funding the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in Haiti. The prosecution offices working with the 18 pre-existing jurisdictions have been updated pursuant to a certification process of judges and government officers, and the number of officers working at the first instance levels goes up to 170, and in the appeals court and specialized labor courts has gone up to 56. During the 2020 to 2025 period, 55 government commissions received initial training, and 35 other individuals continued with their training at the School of the Judiciary. 12 training workshops have been carried out to support government commissioners as well. A specialized commission was set up on the 31st of July 2024 within the Ministry of Justice and Public Security in order to deal with following up on GBV cases in the 12 pre-existing jurisdictions in the country. As of the establishment of that commission, 42 different cases have been dealt with. 30 have led to prosecutions and sentences, and 12 have led to the case being struck down and the person being freed. I now want to refer to the right to freedom of movement and the right to a private life and the protection of the family. Steps have been taken and implemented to prevent the phenomenon of forced evictions, but results are still limited. At the level of the prosecution office and the judiciary, we have taken steps to focus on supporting the judiciary to issue findings against those involved in forced evictions, and the government has not been encouraging forced evictions. But following the events of Pelerin, a suburb in 2018, the government has taken new steps to support victims. Those demolished homes have been rebuilt by the public social housing company, the EPPLS, and 4 of those properties have already, or the previous owners have already taken ownership of their new homes, and the state places particular emphasis on the respect for fundamental rights, in particular the right to housing and human dignity. In line with Article 36(1) of the Constitution, eviction for public utility reasons must be accompanied with due warning and compensation. And if the project is abandoned, that property must be given back to the owner. The authorities ensure that nobody living in camps or informal housing are evicted without a replacement which is sustainable and humane be identified and proposed to them. And in terms of freedom of opinion, expression and assembly, the freedom of the press to have access to information and the respect for the work of human rights defenders. The Haitian state reiterates its commitment to the freedom of the press and the respect for the work of human rights defenders. The Constitution enshrines access to information, and efforts are made to ensure that journalists may freely conduct their profession in the full respect of the law. The state places particular emphasis on the working conditions of human rights defenders and recognizes the challenges that they are confronted with. Actions are underway to strengthen protection mechanisms and to promote a safer environment for these essential workers, their work underpinning democracy. In terms of incitement to violence, this is criminalized by the Criminal Code adopted at the Ministerial Council on the 24th of June 2025. On the cases that you raise, in particular, the murder of the couple in Ursenville in 2014, the disappearance of Vladimir Leganye, the journalist, in 2018, and the murder of Naomi Joseph in 2019, the Haitian authorities reaffirmed their desire to shed every light on those cases, and the cases are currently at the Office of the Public Prosecutor's level. Turning to anti-government demonstrations, between September and November 2019, individuals apparently belonging to armed gangs infiltrated protest movements. This led to the loss of human life. Given this context, the Haitian government required the police to undertake due diligence to avoid any repetition of this situation. The Minister of Justice and Public Security took concrete measures to end the excessive use of force by national police officers during demonstrations. These measures in particular include strengthening training in the area of law enforcement and the respect for human rights, as well as the application of disciplinary and legal sanctions as appropriate in cases of demonstrated and proven violence.
Une autre question qui est revenue encore sur la table.
Another question that came up again related to the worsening human rights situation since 2024, thanks to armed gang control in certain zones, challenges with infrastructure, sexual violence, the group clustering of children, and we needed to give concrete examples you were asking for. Chair, committee members, the courts don't all apply the covenants in the same way, but it's often evoked in the rulings and judicial edicts issued by lawyers in individual cases, in particular in habeas corpus appeals. An example of this was the court in Port-au-Prince, which evoked it in the context of a government sent to the judicial police to report a excessively lengthy detention and a request to send the individual to the prosecutor's office. Article 176 of the amended criminal law in Article 276.2, I quote, stipulates that international treaties or agreements once ratified by the Haitian government and international cooperation is essential to limit arms trafficking in Haiti. And another question, what are you planning to do to reduce lawless areas? We are in the process of recruiting police officers in order to increase the number of police operating, strengthen our intelligence, and to tackle the multiplication of no-go areas. This is all underway. In terms of how to resolve prolonged detention and whether or not we plan alternative measures to detention, all of the courts hold hearings with or without the presence of a jury as required by the government. Government commissioners are responsible for filing evidence-based reports to the Minister of Justice with a view to reducing prison overcrowding. alternative measures to prison are allowed for in the new criminal code, which has already been adopted by the Ministerial Transition Council as of the 24th of June 2025 and the Council of Ministers. On the question, what specific measures do you plan to take to guarantee judges' safety, particularly judges responsible for financial crimes? Judges will be equipped with armored vehicles and will have security details at their disposal for their personal safety. Can you carry out the referendum with the current level of insecurity? Well, we're working to foster a more peaceful environment, but there are 7 out of 10 departments that are not affected by insecurity issues. And the police force and other security forces are working to really pull out the stops to ensure the basic minimum requirements are in place to carry out the referendum and bolster security in those areas I mentioned, and also to work in the other 3 zones where there is a heightened level of insecurity. And then the last question, which we'll answer now. And as I said earlier, the other questions will have answers sent in writing subsequently. What specific measures have you undertaken to move forwards with the Petro-Caribbean case? The answer is investigations have been carried out by the Higher Court of Accounting and the Administrative Council, as well as the corruption body and other agencies who have identified the principal perpetrators in this case. The government is awaiting the reduction in insecurity to encourage the courts and all of the competent agencies to play their respective roles in this case. It's of note that the government is engaged in an intense campaign to confront the armed violence being perpetrated by gangs in this context. So, Chair, committee members, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've answered the majority of the questions, more than the majority. And as I said to you earlier, other answers will be provided in the coming days. Of course, they'll be provided by, indeed, the concerned authorities who are competent in the spheres in question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your replies. Then in the remaining the time, we'd like to pose some follow-up questions. Then I will invite Madame Tigruza.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And indeed, if you're able to send additional information in to those questions you couldn't answer, that would be really useful for the committee. There is one question I asked earlier, and I think you haven't mentioned it. And once again, I do think it is important because it stands at the crossroads of many of the issues we've mentioned here, be that identity, legal recognition of people, and also the electoral rights mentioned by Mr. Quesada and Mr. Corazzo. And that is this question of ID papers. Once again, according to the figures we have, but it's not at all easy for us to really get a clear understanding of the situation, but it would seem that it's not even 30% of the Haitian population that actually have ID papers. And that creates a huge problem. And we really know that very well, because if you don't have papers, there's several other rights. You can access school for children, for example, or access to social security, the right to education, and so on and so forth. And of course, the right to vote. And this is where I make the connection between this issue of ID papers and this electoral year that you are announcing here. If only 30% of the population have ID papers, Haitians won't be able to participate in the electoral proceedings that are being organized. And more specifically, to frame my question, according to the information we've received, the offices responsible for civil registration are not organized, they're not up and running or operational, and so national ID, the national ID office basically isn't in a position to actually provide and publish and issue those documents, which of course are a key guarantee of enjoying key rights, including those under the covenant. So if you could come back to that, because once again, it's no small thing not having ID papers, and the Inter-American Court indeed issued a ruling affecting Haiti. It effectively condemns people to social or legal death in reality. That's the reality we're looking at, so it's very important.
Thank you very much, Madam Tiguruza. Then I will give the floor to Mr. Quesada.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I have 3 follow-up questions, please. Both yesterday and today, we've heard references to the government commissioners who represent the executive with the judiciary. I wonder if you could explain a little more with some detail what role these government commissioners have within the courts of justice. Secondly, this change in the nomenclature used for children in situations of domestic instability, I wonder if you could tell us a little more detail and more substantively the implications behind this name change. And then finally, it was mentioned that as of February 2024, there has been compulsory certification by judges by the National Judges Council, and this ensures that the judiciary retains complete independence from executive interference or dependence on the executive. And I'd like to know exactly what requirements and need to be complied with by the judges to get this certification, and to what extent does it consolidate the judiciary's independence? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quesada. Now I give the floor to Mr. Carozzo.
Thank you very much to the delegation. My statement, when I spoke beforehand, I didn't talk about item number 24, which relates to participation in publicly organized events. And of course, this directly relates to the referendum and other elections that you're organizing. And we've heard different perspectives on how this calendar of elections will be organized. The date of the 7th of February is clear, and that's not far away, just over 100 days, and we wish you all the very best with, or 200 days rather. We wish you all the very best with that, and we hope that the program you're laying out isn't wishful thinking, and that it will really bring about the enjoyment of rights by the population. We are coming to the conclusion of this constructive dialogue. And at the beginning, we were hoping it wasn't a lip service exercise, a routine exercise. We were hoping that we would be able to really get to grips with the different contexts. As the Citizens Protection Office was saying, get to grip with contexts that really go beyond what we can easily imagine when we hear about the situation being faced by the population in terms of human rights violations. This context presents the committee with the challenge of complying with the very first of our obligations, and that is to protect and respect the fundamental rights of more than 12 million people in Haiti. Personally, it seems to me that it's impossible as things stand in the current situation of insecurity to bring this about. We have heard that obviously the Haitian population desperately desire a return to tranquility and peace. But it leads me to my really first and most fundamental question, and that is whether or not the state is really in a position to achieve that given the current context. And that gives rise, I think, to a renewed obligation incumbent on the international community, and that is to support, beyond the Haitian state, the Haitian people, the people of Haiti. It's an undeniable obligation that's incumbent on the international community. It's an urgent obligation. And international institutions have been working for some time, for 20 years, on trying to meet that commitment. And they worked through the institution they set up to protect the rights of citizens. To do that, that's been being developed over the last 20 years. And indeed, the context in Haiti requires that. It requires that international shared responsibility, and that all of the states parties get involved in trying to identify a solution for this population, which is suffering so much. And I say that with the hope that the follow-up to this dialogue come not only with the recommendations to the state party, but comes along with a call to the international community to shoulder the commitment that is on all of our shoulders. So thank you very much. Thank you, Head of Delegation, and thank you to the distinguished delegation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caruso. Is there any other member who wish to intervene? If not, I will go back to the delegation. Madam Sengjang, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président du Comité des droits de l'homme,
Mr. Chairperson of the Human Rights Committee, distinguished members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Haitian government and on behalf of the delegation, I'm very grateful to you for your kindness, the kindness you've shown towards us. We're very particularly grateful to the various experts who have given their time to analyze our country report. We've taken due note of all of your recommendations, and we are even more determined to take all of the necessary steps in collaboration with other state sectors in order to come up with effective, concrete responses to the concerns connected to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in our country. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of those who actively participated in this meeting dedicated to the evaluation of the second periodic report of Haiti by this Human Rights Committee. The fruitful exchanges that we held over the last 2 days bear witness to our shared commitment to present a rigorous, transparent report in line with our international commitments. These exchanges of views have underscored the importance of close collaboration between the concerned agencies in order to better reflect and understand progress made, as well as persistent challenges and the efforts that need to be made to continue to bolster the respect for human rights. I'm not going to answer Mr. Carasso directly, but I'd like to just add something to what he said earlier. Haiti isn't the only country to experience crises. Since the beginning of humanity, the Bible tells us, and every people has gone through difficult times. Those of us that are here today, and I'm absolutely certain and convinced that all of the Haitian people knows that one day, not in the too distant future, we will exit this crisis, and we are working hard. We are pulling out all the stops. The citizens, the institutions, religious leaders, women, men, young people, everybody.